Okay, are we ready to start? My understanding is that Joseph is going to start us off with a summary of this section. So let's hear it, Joseph.
Okay. I'm going to attempt at summarizing what I've understood, hopefully to help bring everyone or expose my lack of understanding so Andrew can enlighten me on what's actually happening in this act. So my understanding is Kent is still working kind of behind the scenes to try and protect the king's interest. And he has, what kind of stood out for me as I was trying to do my little summaries this week is he has this one encounter where he ends up in the stock. So I guess he ends up apprehended for challenging. I didn't quite understand what was happening, why he was challenging, why he was so fixated on this one character, I think it was the steward. But it seems like he's uncovering a plot against the king, and where I spent a lot of my time really analyzing was scene 4 when he gets back to the king. And it seems, up until that point, he's in disguise, but now it didn't say he was in disguise. So I think he's revealed himself to the king again. And what I didn't understand was it seems like the king's welcoming him back, or at least accepting his message of warning. And why the king all of a sudden has a change of heart for him and is willing to listen to him. But I think he was coming back to the king in scene 4 to warn him that there's this plot against him.
I thought he was still in disguise. Did anybody? Yeah, I think he was still.
Was he still in disguise?
I think he's still.
Okay,
and not only is he still in disguise, but when the king finds him, he's still in the stocks.
Yeah.
The stocks
okay.
You're out in a public place with your I think your hands and feet locked in position, in an extraordinarily uncomfortable position, and you're just exposed to the sun and everything. You can't swat flies away from your face or mosquitoes or anything, and then people usually go by and make fun of you. So
got it. So he's in the stocks. The king comes upon him because he's now this in disguise servant that the king, I remember from the last act, the king just welcomed him in as he was in disguise. So he wants to know what's happening, and he explains that he thinks there's some plot against him, and so the king now wants to see his daughters to confront them about it, and I found the one interesting thing where Gloucester is saying that they don't want to see you, like they're not willing to come, and he says, no, you don't understand. I'm not asking, I'm demanding that they come here. And then so Regan comes in, and one thing I was confused about is she started defending a sister. I wasn't sure which sister she was defending.
Goneril.
It was Goneril. Okay.
Because he's just come from Goneril's house to Regan's, because Regan he believes will allow him his men, whereas Goneril asked him to reduce them. So he's going to her to be trusting that she's going to be the more loving and loyal daughter. But Goneril has sent her messenger, Oswald, ahead to warn Regan of what she's done and what he's coming to do.
Make sure that Regan doesn't welcome him and that Regan is going to side with Goneril in the whole thing.
So maybe to back up, because I totally missed this, what is the plot against the king? So do we know? Is it
it's
clear?
Not really a plot against the king. It was that, if my understanding is that Goneril had insisted his men were acting like children. They were being wild and out of control. She told him to reduce his number. I mean, I guess more largely you could look at that as a plot just to reduce his power to nothing, because he's tried to give them an inheritance but keep some dignity and some sort of power for himself. She asks him to reduce his men. He's offended, goes to Regan, assuming she'll welcome him in with all of his men. And then there's the confrontation between him and Regan, where Goneril comes in too. And then it gets reduced to the point of zero. He can have zero. They start outdoing each other, saying, well, actually, you don't even need 50. You don't really need 25. You don't need any at all. And it gets down to the point that they're just taking away all of his protection and dignity. That's what I had the sense of more.
And you were asking,
yeah, that's what I got. Oh, go ahead.
You're asking about the messenger, right? And I thought what he was mad at the messenger for was just that he was carrying messages for between Goneril and Regan that Kent knew were not respectful enough, right? Like Goneril is sending something to Regan saying his men are being crazy. Don't let him stay with you. Send him back to me and convince him that he doesn't need the men that he has.
And not only
I
that,
see,
but
which makes a lot more sense with, yeah, what's happening later on, because it didn't seem like, it seemed like Regan was trying to plead with the king, it didn't seem like she was scheming or trying to, overthrow him or anything. It seemed like there was still some sympathy towards him or care towards him, and he was just in another one of his rages towards the of scene 4. And Kent seems like his biggest concern right now is the king has no protection. So Kent's still looking out for the king. He's got none of his guards around him. And so there's no specific plot against his life right now. He's just, he's going a little crazy. And
also to connect those two elements that you're talking about, Oswald is the one who, when the king asked, do you know who I am, said, you're my lady's father, and insulted him. And then Kent in the previous scene, isn't that right? Kent in the previous scene tripped him. They already had a confrontation back at Goneril's house, and now he's come to Regan's, and here he is again, doing something insulting again. And so that's the source of the confrontation.
And the element before to remember is that Goneril had encouraged Oswald to show disrespect to the king and his knights. And so Oswald was doing that in a way it was not appropriate for a servant to do to anybody. And then when Oswald, Goneril gives him a message to Regan, when he gets to Regan's court, she gets the message and she says, okay, we're going to take off. So she and her husband leave their own place. The king was coming to their place to stay. Well, they left ahead so he wouldn't find them there. And then they told the messengers, Kent and Oswald, okay, follow us to Gloucester. They're going to go stay with Gloucester so that they can avoid the king. And they said, now, and they told Kent, you just come and follow us, and then we'll get around to answering you. They didn't want to give an answer to Kent right away. So Kent saw that Oswald's message resulted in them leaving like that.
I see. So, we didn't see a lot of Edmund here. He's off somewhere. He's the one really plotting. Like, he's got the ambitions, but the daughters don't really. They're just, from all the way back in, some of the early scenes of Act 1, they're just concerned with the king's instability, which is creating this unnecessary tension.
That seems so generous to me. They're not plotting, but they're defaulting on a responsibility that they promised, and they're abandoning. I mean, by the end of this, now we can talk about to what extent King Lear is responsible himself for his reaction. But by the end of this, he's going off to live in the wild by himself with no men and no home and no protection.
And a storm.
So they completely turn they say, I love you so much. I love you. You're the only one I love, and promise devotion to him. And now this is one of the topics that interested me the most, is what is so offensive and insulting about the sequence of things that they do. But they're treating him in a completely degraded, demeaning manner, and not taking, Regan is cold at the end when she's like, oh, he needs to learn from his mistakes. It's his fault, and everyone who makes mistakes needs to learn from their own. And so she just she's actually concerned about him. she expresses no real concern for him, and from what
yeah. So
Out of the two
yeah,
sisters-
I want to read I just want to read a line that really emphasizes that. It's 345 on page 119 in this edition, where Regan says to Gloucester, who's really concerned about what's happening to the king. "Oh, sir, to willful men, the injuries that they themselves procure must be their schoolmasters." So, you know, well, it's just like a boy, you know, the boy stomped off. He's just going to have to learn his lesson. And that's the way she's talking about her king and father.
And above, Goneril says, "'Tis his own blame hath put himself from rest, and must needs taste his folly."
So a question I have, what might they do better? So because on one hand, you've got this really unstable king who's banished one of his daughters. You know, I don't know yet, or we don't know yet if he has a history of violence. Like, I'm sure that wouldn't be out of the question that he might just choose to permanently end them. But what should they be doing? Because if they want to express sympathy, would it just be to leave and go away? What could they do differently?
Well, I guess one question here is, are his 100 men really a problem? And I don't see any indication that they actually are. So it felt to me, I mean, I wrote down the sequence of things that Lear finds so insulting, and I think that might be the heart of understanding this, is trying to understand what's so offensive about the way they're treating him. But if it's not actually, why wouldn't he have the right to retain his 100 men? It's not like when he gave them their inheritance, he was signing off on all dignity and property and power himself. It wasn't like he's dead and he's just turning everything over. So I didn't understand. It seemed to me like they were, when he came to live with them with 100 men, they just didn't want to be burdened with the responsibility and didn't want him to have any power left. It's not actually self-protection, and it's not actually protection of him.
I thought it's not, I didn't think it's either of, I agree with you, but I also think it's not just, I don't think they're saying we don't want him to have any power. I think it's an imposition. Like,
yeah,
he's coming into their houses with 100 men who I think at the beginning, even it was saying that they were being slightly disruptive, but then Regan says to kind of stoke that, right? She tells Oswald to like make that worse, basically, which is not appropriate, but also like that is a lot to ask, to say, yeah, I'm going to come stay with you. I'm going to have 100 people. It's really disruptive to the household. And that's the point they're making when they're saying like, well, we have people to serve you if you come to our houses. So why not just come and be part of our household and be served by the people that we have? So I don't think what they're doing is legitimate, but it's also a strange request to say, I'm going to come stay with you, but I'm going to run my household independent of yours and expect you to just kind of work around that.
I guess this is kind of why it's the tragedy of King Lear, right? Everything's just escalating because of rationalizations or stubbornness or, pettiness. So a lot of this probably could have been avoided, but it seems like it's not going to have a happy ending. Okay, interesting.
Did you say, Joseph, that you think there's not going to be a happy ending? Because that would be the understatement of the century.
I don't know the ending of this, but I'm guessing it's not going to have a
It's
happy
not
ending.
looking good right now.
It was so bad that for 100 years, that ending was not performed after the original, and they modified it. So they said this ending is unbearable.
Hey, we don't know what the ending is yet. So
yeah, I don't know the ending.
Let's see, to try to imagine this. This is just something I think that often when you have older parents that are relying upon their kids and they say, okay, you say about we want to move in with you. we want to come there because, it's sometimes the kids initiate, sometimes the parents might initiate it. We're not we're not as independent as we were. We want to be close to the grandkids. Okay, we're going to move in with you, and we're going to sell our house, and you can have control over you can have the money part of it to take care of the expenses, kind of thing. We're going to move in with you. And then that's very difficult. Like, what are the expectations? You don't usually lay it down ahead of time. People don't think about how the older people will want to continue to live their life, and then over a long period of time, they rub against each other a lot. So I think it's in that way, it's a natural, often occurring situation.
I think what's important to me to integrate everything we've talked about so far is, I think, Greta, you're right, and Andrew, so there are difficulties inherent in this situation that Goneril and Regan are having to face, but I don't feel any sympathy for them in facing it the way it's been presented, because I don't feel sympathy for them, but nor do I feel total lack of judgment of Lear and his behavior. But that judgment doesn't give me sympathy for them because of the way, well, first of all, the breach between their declarations of love and their behavior now. And second, because because of the manner in which they manage that difficulty with, like, plotting with each other and being completely condescending to him and not showing any compassion to him at all that I can see. So I don't know, did other people feel sympathetic with them?
I just want to point
Michelle,
out
I see Michelle brought up that Goneril does mention when they're talking that actually Goneril and Regan talking to each other at the end of the first scene say, well, look, he banished Cordelia. Is he going to lash out at us like that too? So that was definitely a concern they raise. Yeah, but how are we to read their characters given the situation, and what ought they to have done? Raj, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I wanted to just say about these 100 men thing that he had, if we go back to Act 1, Scene 1, I refreshed my memory, he told them that he's going to come with 100 knights. So he says, ourselves by monthly course with reservation of 100 knights, by you to be sustained, shall our abode make with you by due turn. Hmm. So it's not like he didn't, this was part of the arrangement, and then for them to so quickly go back on them it's not like there is some reasonableness in how they are treating him.
Well, I don't think how they're treating him is reasonable if you're talking about like the disrespect, but I think saying you can't just show, like, even though it was said beforehand, it's the comparison to real life, I think, is really helpful too, because it's like, yeah, if your parents came and they were like, I'm going to come live in your house, live exactly how I used to live, and expect you to just accommodate that, that's not a reasonable thing to do either. So I don't have sympathy for them because they're being so disrespectful of him, but I also have sympathy with the fact that this isn't an appropriate situation. Like, that the way that they were planning on, no one was thinking forward. No one looked forward and thought, yeah, that is not a sustainable way of doing this. That's not going to work. And now they're stuck. And even with them talking to each other, I don't like, you do that with your siblings, like you talk to each other about your parents, and it's like, and when they do things, and it's not like plotting or something. I know it's
not the context that this is her mother that she's talking to.
So let me.
I'm talking about my dad. Okay, just like when my dad does something weird, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna go to Lana to my sister and talk about that, and you're gonna say, well, how do we deal with, like, oh, he wants to come visit at this time, but we have plans and he's not being receptive to that or something. It's like, well, you're gonna talk about that and say, well, you tell him this and I'll tell him this, and like we have to be a united front against it, because that's how you deal with your parents, because you're the ones with less power.
Lisa, watch out here. Fair warning.
Oh my gosh.
But it's just like you guys have to, in some ways, the siblings are a unit too, and so you have to be, united in the same way that like a husband and wife have to be.
That often happens. That often causes fractures among the siblings. The different ways in which they're responding to difficult older parent situation. So you do want to have a united front if you can.
So it's true, but at the same time, stepping back from everything we've seen so far, it feels like what is being emphasized to us is that Lear made the wrong choice. He banished the good daughter and he kept the bad ones. He gave the inheritance to the bad ones. And that's what we're seeing play out, is now the bad ones are not taking sufficient care of him. They're not handling the challenges of dealing with somebody who's senile and prone to rage. They're not handling that well. And Cordelia would have. So it feels like the most, just stepping back and taking a bird's eye view, we're supposed to be feeling like they're handling things terribly, whatever is difficult about the situation. And the daughter who would have handled things well is off with nothing.
I don't feel that, because Lisa, if
Oh, what happened?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Is that
I don't know,
Nicholas?
I was muted.
Nicholas.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I took them at their word that the 100 men were like being violent, and maybe I shouldn't have. But when I think of that, especially because they're the women in the household, and you got 100 men, and a lot of your servants are probably women too. I'm thinking of like Penelope, you know, with the suitors in the Odyssey and the way she's being treated, and how like no one would believe her, like, you're just, you're over exaggerating, or, you're just putting your feelings into it or whatever. Like, I would believe them, but I understand, given their other thoughts, maybe their credibility should be called in question even on this topic. But like, I reserve that there still could be sympathy for them up until the end of like scene 4, act 2, when Goneril gets greedy. And then I think it really does become a plot. Like when it got to 25 men instead of 50, that's when they should have stopped, I think. And like, okay, take that
down to 0.
and go for another day.
Yeah,
Right?
down about 0. Why do you need anybody? So I want to look back at where Goneril first brings up the problem. But just as a side comment, Nicholas, you said, I can't imagine having to do that, though. One of the things that Shakespeare helps you to do is to start imagining. You want to imagine now what it's going to be like when your parents need to be cared for by you. They might not know it. That is something that's going to happen to most of us at some point, both on the older parent side and then on the kids side. So Shakespeare's like, okay, start thinking about these things now. And how you're going to handle difficult situations like that. But let me go back to Act 1, Scene 3. This is page 41, and let's just read through what Goneril says. And I guess raise your hands when you think is she being reasonable, or is she where is she doing this badly? So she's talking to Oswald. Did my father strike my gentleman for chiding of his fool? Aye, madam. By day and night he wrongs me. Every hour he flashes into one gross crime or other that sets us all at odds. I'll not endure it. His nights grow riotous, and himself upbraids us in every trifle. Sounds like a reasonable complaint, and we don't have any reason not to believe her, at least at this point, about the behavior of the knights. We don't really know. When he returns from hunting, I will not speak with him. Say I am sick. Good idea. If you come slack of former services, you shall do well. The fault of it I'll answer. He's coming, madam, I hear him. Put on what weary negligence you please, you and your fellows. I'd have it come to question. If he distaste it, let him to my sister, whose mind and mine I know and that are one, not to be overruled. So I guess right now, even now, she's like, this has been bad and difficult. I'm going to make sure to provoke him by having my servants be insulting towards him and his men, so that then I can kick him out. I'll have a real legit reason for kicking him out.
I I would say to that, like, if you have to get to the point where you can't just reason with the person and like, look, you know, this, and this happened, therefore, you know, don't you think something is warranted? They clearly have to come to this point where they have to do this roundabout, you know, thing, this roundabout flocked or whatever, because they know that, well, maybe they don't know, but it seems like they can't, you know, just talk to the guy. They have to do this scheme. And if you had to come to that situation with the person, I mean, that's on them in some important way. That's on him, Lear.
Okay, so what do others think about that? Do you think that this is it's a way to handle this really difficult situation?
I am completely convinced now it's a really earnestly difficult situation. I'm convinced that I'll give Goneril that much sympathy, that she's been put in a bad position. So you talked me into it. The reaction seems terrible to me, because just picture Cordelia if she were in this scene. Is that what she would say? Would she would say, go, okay, servants, go try to provoke him so that it's, you know, brought to a pitch, and me, I'm going to run away and hide. I can't imagine her doing that. And the contrast seems to highlight what's so, I don't know, pathetic about their means of dealing with it. But I do sympathize with the difficulty of dealing with somebody who is senile. But that seems to me the moral challenge is to treat with dignity someone with whom you can no longer reason. And it feels like that's what Cordelia did.
So I think that's
what the consequences. She was willing to accept her own suffering or something bad happening, but the dignity was the absolute.
Yeah, so that's a great way to maybe to ask the question about this is Goneril treating Lear with dignity?
No.
Or is she treating him without? And then John wanted me to read the rest of the speech, that part of it. Now, by my life, old fools are babes again and must be used with checks as flatteries when they are seen abused.
Yeah.
So it seems like an expression of her contempt for her father in this situation. He's just an old baby. He's an old fool, and that means he's a baby, and I got to treat him like a baby.
I mean, to me, the key word in that, what you just read, Andrew, is must. Now, because like, you got to do this. Now, there's definitely contempt in, you know, her tone when she's speaking there, but she didn't put herself in this situation. It's the nature of old age, right? And also his nature too, right? Because
the nature of old age is that you have to treat an adult who raised you like they're a brat that you have to check and flatter and manipulate. That's not.
It might depend on the particular old person. Maybe for Lear, a king who has like 100 guys about him, like maybe he is this kind of old person who has this amount of power and stuff, you know.
If that's the way you feel, Nick, I'm not going to give you half my kingdom and all my and let you stay.
I'm going to my other kid, that's for sure.
Yeah, you're not getting anything from me, and then because then you'll be like, oh, now you're in my house and you got to behave like this, and you can't ask for this, that, or the other. You'll start laying conditions, even though it was everything that you have, I gave to you. That's it.
So let us not put ourselves in this situation. Then is what I would say.
Well, that's what.
Don't get old.
Back to Greta's point, don't get old and the fools don't get old until you get wise.
Yeah, but also, I mean, it is good. The fool is regularly saying, you gave everything away, and you had protection from this before, but you gave it all away. So don't give protection. Don't give all your stuff away to your kids if you're not ready to have this happen to you. Joseph, you wanted to get in?
Yeah, so I'm convinced it's a tough situation, and the way that the daughters are behaving is just not appropriate, and a reflection of their own defensiveness, right? The way Goneril's talking is, just a defense mechanism. She's trying to avoid having to deal with the situation and face up that she is not capable of the kind of dignity that her sister is. What's the other sister's name? The Cordelia. Cordelia, right? They're just not. And so it begs the question again, what would the right thing to do be if you are a person like Cordelia? And I think it must be to leave, right? You just have to recognize that there's no positive outcome here, like Cordelia did. And she said, okay, well, I'm going to be disinherited, but I'm not willing to behave badly to this person. And I can't reason with him. So I'll take it on the chin and leave, as opposed to corrupt her own soul to as a rationalization, which is what the other sisters are doing, right? They're using all the classic defense mechanisms of
the right thing to do in her circumstances, but I don't think she would have left if she had had the opportunity to stay. I think she's still senile or not. She would have, like Kent doesn't leave.
Right.
He's totally mistreated by Lear. And let's see, Kent has lines. Well, it's not exactly the same principle, but I just love Kent so much. He has lines about people who just kind of sycophantically do whatever the leader wants them to do. And he doesn't do that. He does stand up to Lear, and he does try to guide Lear in a better direction. And when Lear doesn't do as he recommends and banishes him and threatens him with death, he comes back in disguise and serves him anyway. That's what I feel Cordelia would effectively do too, given the opportunity. She still actually is concerned for her father's welfare. So what exactly the prescription is of what they ought to do, I don't know. But John said in the chat, this is a sick old parent descending into senility that makes all the more important to treat them carefully, not callously. And the fact of senility, I mean, they just get tossed aside.
One thing that is what the root of it all is to have an interior disposition of respect and love. And I think that that's what Goneril reveals, is she has an interior disposition of contempt, and that affects everything you do in all of your your decisions. So maybe it's not clear what the right decision is, but it's clear the heart it has to come from. And then you're going to keep trying to find different ways to do it that respects the dignity of the person. I've the other ways it's just coming to mind is I worked when I was younger, I worked in nursing homes for a while, and it's a very similar thing with the nurses' aides, who are the ones who actually do the regular care for the elderly. There are those who, and they're difficult. It's difficult to do. There are those who have, you can tell they treat them like babies. They don't have any respect for the fact that this was an adult. They don't have that respect. Between that and the ones who have the respect, they know they have to exercise authority over them now, but they have a deep respect for them, and that comes out in their care. It just makes a huge difference in the care, that inner attitude.
Something I would like to ask, Joseph, you said that maybe for Cordelia, you said maybe the proper thing she would do is exit the situation, and that would be the best thing. But Lisa, you said maybe the best thing would be to do as Kent does and try to guide him day by day and take each day as new and just continue trying. Would it, I like to what you said, Joseph, with those two options in mind, would it be better to leave and remember this great man who you love the way he was and have no, but then he became this, and then you have like those bad memories of the experiences of his senility or whatever, and you just get to remember the good parts, or stay and try to respect him because of his good parts from the past, but also have to suffer through the bad from that same man that you love. So what I'm trying to say is, leave, remember him as he was, or stay and suffer through abuse, and which will corrupt your image of him or taint it, right?
And that's a real suffering too, that your image and memory of them is always going to be bound up now, not with the great people they were, but with how their old age brought them down, and it's really bad.
I think that's a wonderful question to be raised by the themes of this play, and then the answer to it would be would depend on the details of the circumstances. So it sounds like a good thematic question, and then but I like what I like as an answer is, instead of trying to come down on one side or the other of that, Andrew's point about where truly reflecting on where the motivation is coming from. So if leaving were abandoning the person that I loved, I wouldn't leave. If leaving were the best thing for all involved somehow, then I can imagine that. But if there's a real love and attachment, as there clearly is for Kent, then leaving is not an option for him.
We do get an intimation too that Cordelia is coming back in this act.
Mhm.
So Kent has a letter from her, and she's coming back in a way that, like, Kent came back in disguise. Cordelia's going to come back somehow. At least it seems like, in part because she knows her father's in trouble.
Yeah.
Ian?
But I really,
Oh, sorry.
I really like that idea of where is the motivation coming from? And I think that's what makes me not have respect for Goneril and Regan, is that you can see they're not grappling. They don't seem to be grappling with this situation. They seem to be evading it. They seem to be taking shortcut answers to it. And they seem to be mostly focused on their own welfare and very little on his. So it's about where it's coming from in them that makes me not feel respect, despite the difficulty of the situation.
I think it's also a great thing about Shakespeare that he's presenting Goneril in some ways, at least in a way that you see that she's got a problem. That he rarely presents people as just bad, simply, but he kind of shows you the origins of some of their bad decisions and things that make them into bad people. But Ian?
Yeah, on this topic of how to respond in this situation, the Fool had a line, I don't remember it exactly, but something along the lines of, if a wheel is hurtling downhill, you should like separate yourself from the wheel. And he's obviously referring to the fact that this whole thing is about to go really, really bad, and you need to get away from it. He's talking to Kent, who's in the stocks. And the Fool is presented sort of as Lear's conscience. But I wondered at this stage if he's Shakespeare's narrator, in some sense, that Shakespeare himself is saying that when things are about to go this bad, you just want to get out of this situation. Like, that's the right thing to do. Like, all of your I'm struggling for the right word, all of your kind thoughts about your father need to be let go, because this situation is going to go really bad and you need to get away from it. I mean, the Fool himself seems to be wedded to Lear and doesn't himself want to get away, but he says to Kent in the stocks, you know, that one line I thought stood out in regard to this question.
I think I saw the Fool more as voicing what is sensible, but not necessarily what is right. Just often being the voice of common sense in the situation, but I didn't take it in that moment to mean that we should be on the side of the Fool and everybody should just get out and abandon Lear.
But if you had common sense, you would.
You had common sense, you would.
But Kent does not have common sense in that way.
Right.
Let's talk about Lear and his situation in Act 2, Scene 4. And there are any number of great lines here. 2:16. O heavens, if you do love old men, if your sweet sway allow obedience, if you yourselves are old, make it your cause. Send down and take my part. That if you gods yourselves are old, I don't know, what do you think of that? What's in that?
He's pleading with them for empathy.
Mhm.
Well, and what he gets, what I had underlined was the response that he gets from Goneril. Why not by the hand, sir? Well, he says, why are you taking your sister by the hand? You guys are in league against me, basically. Why not by the hand, sir? How have I offended? All's not offense that indiscretion finds, and dotage terms so. Meaning, just your judgment of me as doing something offensive is just your own senility. And that, again, seemed so contemptuous and insulting a way to address him in the moment that he's pleading for empathy.
And it's at the end here in scene 4, at the end of scene 4, that it's definitely clear it's becoming a plot, a negative, malevolent plot, and no longer warranted to give them sympathy for anything but a plot, right? So, yeah.
And then what is it? I think that what are we seeing about what it means to be old?
Hmm.
This is Lear. I don't know if he's spoken of himself this way before.
Mm-hmm.
If you love old men, if you yourselves are old, Lear is recognizing and owning the fact that he's old. What are we seeing of that experience?
Hmm.
Is it that there's inevitable and unavoidable tragedy? Despite what a regal life you've had, all of us are going to come to the same end.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he's characterized by loss. Like it's loss of the respect of his daughters toward him and others toward him, loss of the protection from his servants that are part of his retinue, loss of the relationship with his daughter, loss of his sanity as well. It's like everything is just being taken from him bit by bit.
What he should have done, like the common sense, which the fool comments on, is that in one sense, it is his fault, because he gave up everything that he had and counted on that the daughters would follow through on their part of the bargain, and him staying with them alternately with 100 knights, and he trusted them too much, maybe too much. The fool says something very nice in lines, very simple, but sort of like the lesson about being old. Fathers that bear rags do make their children blind, but fathers that bear bags shall see their children kind. Line 52 in scene 4. So if the father had held on to some bags, he would be getting a lot more respect, and a little bit of nuisance that his knights caused would not seem so onerous. So Nick, that's what I'm going to do.
Keep the money.
I'm going to hold on to at least some of the bags. Yeah.
Well, I think this goes to the point that I raised, Andrew, in my email to you, that it seems like what disturbs him the most is the loss of dignity. I don't know if that's right exactly, but I think my favorite lines in this whole act, it's in scene 4, line 304, when they're saying, you don't need 25, you don't need 50, you don't need 25, you don't need even one.
Or even not the need.
And he says, oh, reason not the need. Our basest beggars are in the poorest things superfluous. Allow not nature more than nature needs. Man's life is cheap as beasts. Thou art a lady, if only to go warm were gorgeous. Why, nature need not what thou gorgeous wearest, which scarcely keeps thee warm. That there's something that's like the men, giving up the men seemed like it was a loss to self-respect in some way. What they were taking away is his dignity and his self-respect.
And that and to him, the knights represented,
Yeah.
Whatever else it was, it represented for him that he still had dignity.
Yeah.
It's like taking away, that reminds me of, just incidentally, like Agamemnon taking away Briseis from Achilles and what that represented to him. Kind of similar, like they're taking away his proof of Time, his kleos. I just had to put that in there, but that's great. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Then he goes on to say, but for true need, you heavens, give me that patience I need. So that's I'm not quite sure where he was going, whether that's an interrupted thought, but for true need. So there's nature doesn't need these things, but true need there is some sort of true need of them, of the things that make us more than a beast. And then he goes on to say, you heavens, give me that, you see me here, you gods, a poor old man, as full of grief as age, wretched in both. So again, this kind of coming, that he almost sums up the loss of dignity by saying, I'm a poor old man now.
And the other thing I was fascinated by is this, this desperate desire not to shed tears in front of them. So it says, touch me with noble anger and let not women's weapons, water drops, stain my man's cheeks. So it's broken him inside the way they've treated him. And it's taking away his dignity, and his response is to feel old and weak and driven to tears. And then that itself seems to feel like further indignity to him, that he's been reduced to tears.
He so holds on to that you think I'll weep. No, I'll not weep. I have full cause of weeping, but this heart shall break into 100,000 flaws, or ere I'll weep.
Yeah.
I also like how he says to nature, touch me with noble anger, which is, I think, different from the way he used to be acting when he really was angry. And he kind of knew, like at this point, like I need to collect myself. I need to calm myself when I'm talking to these people. I can't always be angry. And he's been doing that. But now he's like, no, now it's justified. I should be angry, right? Yes.
No, yeah. It's deeper than that. It's deeper than that, Nick. It is that the anger is a defense against the desire to weep. He wants to cry. And instead, if he's angry, then the tears will go down and the anger will take its place. He wants to replace the tears with anger. The two things are linked, I think. Like people agree.
So he has to lash out, because if he doesn't lash out, he's going to dissolve into tears.
Exactly. Yeah, which is true in psychology. That does happen many times. Not many times. In the majority of cases, or in a very large proportion of cases, behind anger there is hurt.
So I just have to point out here that it's after that speech that absolutely broke my heart into 100,000 pieces, that it was immediately after that Goneril and Regan say he has to learn from his mistakes. So if we needed any proof that they're completely heartless, that there's the whole of my case.
Yeah. And it's almost as though, I don't know if I hadn't really seen this before, but at 3:30, it's almost as though they're both, Goneril and Regan, are feeling that, oh, this is a little awkward that that he's going off like this. And so sorry, it's Cornwall mentions it. Regan says, this house is little, the old man and his people cannot be well bestowed. So she might be saying that, what can I do about this? And then Goneril is, well, it's his own fault and he deserves what he gets.
I'm so curious where it's going, because that's such a self-destructive attitude to have, right? It seems self-interested, but often when you aren't kind internally, when you don't hold that kind of kind perspective, you end up just destroying yourself. So I have no idea, like I don't know the end of the story, so I'm interested.
And I think it's going to be, it's very hard for you to imagine. You probably can never imagine what's going to happen to the sisters.
Yeah.
I can imagine they're going to be miserable.
What's going to happen to Lear, not the sisters, I don't think.
Well, the other thing here is that, forgive this quick diversion, but one of my former professors told me a story that has stuck with me ever since, that he was sitting in a booth in a restaurant behind a couple, and the young man was telling the young woman the elaborate lie he told his boss to get out of work so that he could be with her. And he said he just heard silence for a minute. And then the woman turned to him and said, "But you wouldn't lie to me, right?"
Wow. Dang.
Oh, I have never forgotten that. It's so powerful. So anyway, not Goneril and Regan to be looking at each other saying, "But you wouldn't treat me like this," right? So there's an alliance between the two of them. But yeah, this betrayal of what's in their hearts should make everybody mistrust what they can expect from them.
Something similar, not exactly the same, but something similarly to what you said does happen, right? When Lear is cursing Goneril, Regan says that you would do the same if like you were in a bad mood towards me, and he said, no, I would never do that for you because you have such a you are very caring and all that. But it's sort of, there is an analogy that she thinks like if you can curse her like this, calling down all kinds of terrible things upon her, you could potentially do that for me too.
Well, isn't that how it all starts with them, right? Because when they see him do that to Cordelia, they kind of realize, well, she's the good one, right? What's he going to do when he finds out how we really feel about him? So that's what kind of starts their suspicion. So it's kind of like they're all in this downward spiral of how their thinking is going to just guide their behavior.
Roger,
why does
251, just sorry, from when you talk about the way he said something for Lear in 251, when he like casts down Goneril, and he like lampoons her and calls her like an embossed carbon go in my corrupted blood a tumor. But in that whole speech, in comparison to the way he casts down Cordelia, it is much more reserved, and which leads me to think like, again, he knows like she doesn't deserve the same thing I said to Cordelia. I need, even though I feel what I'm feeling, I need to kind of dial it back and, yes, condemn her, but, not obliterate her totally. You know what I'm trying to say? I think you know.
Yeah, but doesn't he just not have the weapons to do it anymore? He can't. He already gave her everything. So,
so you think that's right, because he still wants stuff from her. Okay.
I interpreted it.
At 320, this really hits my heart, is when he says he's trying to rouse himself to noble anger. "Know, you unnatural hags, I'll have such revengeance on you both that all the world shall. I'll do such things." Like he can't even think anymore of a curse, or that's I don't know, that's so internally pathetic there.
And
Sarah.
then he wants to weep at the end of that, but tries to.
And that's dry. And then I'm going to go mad because I can't break down and weep. I can't get myself to anger. I'm going crazy. Sarah?
This is maybe a naive question, but like, could he get back his power? I mean, does he have no one to call on? He's given over everything. Like, he has his knights. Could he use them? It just seems like if he's the king still, why can't he? I don't know. Why does he have no recourse at this point?
I think that I think the sense you get is that the 100 Knights are not anything compared to what Cornwall and Albany have. so that he could only get it back if they're willing to give it back to him. And there's no sign that the daughters would be willing to give it back to him. So he really is, even with the 100 Knights, he's really at their mercy.
But I thought, Sarah, that's precisely why they were trying to reduce his retinue. They wanted to make absolute for sure that the situation couldn't be reversed.
Right, right. One other question, we had talked about potential foreshadowing of the relationship deteriorating between the sisters and their husbands. Was there something in this act toward that? Like someone mentions that they are at odds with one another, the dukes?
Yeah, at the start of that act, someone said something.
Yes, some random character who pops in.
Yeah. Have you heard of no likely wars toward twixt the Dukes of Cornwall and Albany? Curran on the first page.
That's it. Yeah.
And then precisely to this point, I wonder why Regan, when she heard about the fight between Goneril and Dad, and Goneril writes to her and says, "This is what happened," she doesn't just respond. She says, "I'm going to go to Gloucester's house and get his advice first," which made me think like she's plotting. Like, why can't she just give her honest response to the situation? She wants to check the lie of the land and think about what the right way to respond to this might be.
I don't think she really wanted Gloucester's advice. I interpreted it that it was just, she just didn't want to be there when Lear showed up. It was a way of kind of brushing him off, because Gloucester would give honorable advice, and I'm sure she doesn't want that.
Now, we never had a chance to talk about this, but wasn't Albany not complicit in all of this the way the rest of them were? That was in the last act, but Goneril was chiding him for being too soft-hearted towards Lear. And we haven't really seen more of that or what that means. But there was the line, Albany says, you may fear too far. And she says, safer than trust too far. Let me still take away the harms I fear, not fear still to be taken. And then later she says to him, this milky gentleness and course of yours, though I condemn not, yet under pardon, you are much more at task for want of wisdom than praised for harmful mildness. And then he says, how far your eyes may pierce, I cannot tell, striving to better, oft we mar what's well. So they're at odds with each other over how to handle this.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to compare Albany and Cornwall. So
Albany
is obviously uncomfortable with the way that Goneril is treating Lear, but he won't assert himself there. Cornwall seems to be all in on the way what Regan is doing, and kind of of one mind with her about how to treat somebody like Kent.
Yeah.
I was saying that in this act somewhere, I don't remember exactly where, Regan says something like, if Lear comes, I will not be there. And then Cornwall turns to her and says, I can confirm to you, neither will I. And I was wondering, like, why does he have to even say that? And I guess that is now contrasting him with Albany. So the line confirms that Cornwall and Regan are on the same page.
So we should talk about
the two daughters. I feel like Goneril is much more manipulative and malicious than Regan. So in the section that Lisa was mentioning, Act 1, Scene 4, line 350, she says, you know, if she, Regan, sustain him, her father, and his 100 knights, when I've showed the unfitness, and then it's cut off. So her letter to her sister is a manipulation to try and get her sister on her side, because she knows that she has to maneuver both of them against Lear. If one of them sides with him, then the other will be left out. So it's just really interesting. Like, she seems to be more of the instigator. But in both cases, I actually feel like the daughters are worse than their husbands. Like, they're the ones, Regan's the one who first suggests locking the doors when she knows her father is out in a storm. in a rage, in a fit, and she's like, we don't have room, like lock the doors. And then her husband, I think, agrees with her, like, yeah, let's lock the doors. But in all of those scenes, it's just really interesting how the daughters seem much more cruel or conniving than their husbands do.
And when Kent is put in the stocks, Cornwall says until noon, and Regan says, no, why until noon, until night or the next morning or whatever. She wants him to suffer even more.
Yeah.
Now,
So a question about.
I wish Greta had been here for the line that Sarah just read, so that she could see that her conversations with Lana about my misdeeds are not the same in character. I hope.
Yeah.
Regan and Goneril's plotting.
Yeah. I wondered, I want to talk about Kent some, but just maybe keep this in mind going forward. Right now, does it seem like Goneril and Regan are unnatural? Because the Lear calls them unnatural hags. There's a lot about nature and what's natural and how nature relates things. But does it seem like they are behaving unnaturally? But I don't really want to talk about that now because we want to talk about Kent. So
yeah, yes.
Lisa, what was your take on Kent here?
I just love Kent. Well, so while I didn't share exactly Raj's enthusiasm for Lear's curses on Goneril's barrenness, I did enjoy his confrontation, Kent's confrontation with Oswald. And just he has so much riding on all of this. There's so much that he's risking himself, and it's all in defense of the king's honor and dignity. And then my favorite line, this is why I said he even has a little panache, is that when they put him in the stocks, he's like, oh, I'll catch up on some sleep. And when I'm not asleep, I'll whistle. So even having to endure the stocks, he just brushes it off as nothing. So I just really admire him.
Agreed.
Is there any reason I shouldn't? That's the. Has anybody found any fault in Kent?
Oh, I just thought him verbally taking Oswald to task was pure Monty Python. You know, your father smells of elderflower when he says you're an eater of broken meats, you know.
I had to wonder, does lily livered come from this originally? Because that was one of the.
I tried to look it up, and they said that it's also in Macbeth, but then I looked up the chronology, and I think King Lear was performed before Macbeth. So I think the internet is wrong. And yeah, you're right, Lisa, that it does seem
that
to
is
come
the
from
source
here.
of.
And this is my conjecture. I didn't have enough time to go into it. I can't guarantee that that's true.
Because terms that we hear used all the time, we can't assume were used in his time. He may have coined them.
One irony, though, in reading that history, I realized was this play with all this pain and these horrible things happening and all was first performed as part of Christmas celebrations on December 26th. Like in front of King James I, who had recently become the king. I was thinking it must not have gone down well as part of Christmas celebrations.
About that section where Kent is just taking it out on Oswald. So I got to that and I just started laughing, and I called my husband in from the other room. I was like, I have to read this excellent diatribe to you. Shakespearean insults. So, I read Kent's lines when he just keeps going and going. And then my husband at the end, he's like, so you know me. Oswald's response.
Well, aren't there, I think people have assembled like charts of Shakespearean insults. Yeah. You can pick your favorite.
Did anybody think that he was excessive in his treatment of Oswald, or that he was excessive in his treatment of Cornwall, or his answers to Cornwall and Regan when they came in? Did he in any way deserve from them the punishment that he got?
When
he did insult Cornwall, which was not very wise, right? Like when he says, I've seen better faces, something like I've seen better faces on shoulders than I see before me, or something like that. That was very rash.
That's
of
around
him.
line 95. Yeah. In Act 2, Scene 2.
Another of my favorite parts in that, I don't know, it felt excessive. I mean, it felt like almost
It
putting
felt
on
like a crowd
show.
pleaser, like the
Like a crowd
Shakespeare
pleaser.
audience would really enjoy it.
Yeah, it felt like a show, but it didn't feel excessive to me. It felt delightful.
I couldn't hear what Sarah said. Can someone repeat it, please? I couldn't hear
sorry.
what Sarah just said.
I said that it would be a crowd pleasing moment, right? It's excessive, but in service of the drama.
Mhm.
Well, when Kent like kicks Oswald in Act 1, I thought that was excessive to me. In that moment, like I didn't have any particular love for Kent. I thought he was one of the good guys, but when he kicked him and followed the lead of the irrational king in that moment, like, yeah, I'll kick him too. Like that seemed to me wrong and stooping to a level that's low. But then if you're thinking about, well, you have to, you know, go along with Lear if you're going to try to guide him, then maybe pragmatically speaking, you have to do that to get in his good graces in that moment. But should you have to resort to that pragmatism to do something good or noble? So
that would defy his own advice. He criticizes them for just being followers. Where is that? And not having the sense to stand up to authority. Oh, here on Act 2, Scene 2, line 80. He says, he calls them rats, and he says, being oil to fire, snow to the colder moods, renege, affirm, and turn their halcyon beaks with every gale, and vary of their masters, knowing not like dogs, but following. And he's claiming that he does not do that.
I think he might have been talking about Oswald when he was when he was describing the rats. I thought he was talking about Oswald.
Oh, yeah. Yes, such a slave as this should. So, but he's saying he does not behave that way as a servant to the king.
So then you're saying that he's justified in by you reading.
I wasn't saying he's justified. I was just saying I didn't think he was doing it to win Lear's favor.
No way.
Justified? I don't know.
This is, and you're talking about back in Act 1 when he tripped Oswald.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah. So where
I remember
is
it as
that?
a kick for some reason, but
Well, that was the one in response to my lady's father, right? He had been prompted to deliberately insult him. So do we just have to accept that return of violence is for insult is kind of the way of things here?
Yeah, but you also have to remember that Oswald is a servant. And Kent is not a servant, he's a retainer, and Lear is the king. So when a servant treats the king in an insulting way, then there's at least in that climate, and maybe even it would be good. What do you need to do? You need to smack him down.
Or execute it, kill him. And I was imagining in those times they would probably kill him, not even just smack him.
Right, which is also the context for why it's so insulting to put Kent in the stocks, right? That is a real insult to the king to put Kent in the stocks.
And you can see that Gloucester is really, I think Gloucester is very shocked that even though he saw everything that happened, he was very shocked that they dared to do such a thing. And rather than say, wait for the king and the king will deal with him, they treated him like a common criminal, rather than like a gentleman that is, you know, maybe you don't like what he did, but treating him like a gentleman and a messenger of the king.
Right, and then Lear calls it that, and the response there on page 99 or line 20 in scene 4, when he finds out that they put Kent in the stocks. No, yes, no, I say yay. By Jupiter, I say, I mean, he cannot believe that they would do this. And he calls it worse than murder to do upon respect such violent outrage.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are punishments that would be according to class.
Mhm.
So this is just like Paul, St. Paul in the Acts of the Apostles says, "I'm a Roman citizen. You can't scourge me,
Mm.
even though I may be in prison. You can't scourge me."
Mhm.
I'm afraid we have to wrap up fairly quickly here. I have to get out.
Quick
of where
question.
Yeah.
What's the
Yes.
disguise that Kent has on it? What is he supposed to look like? A noble, a lackey?
I think he's like one of the retainer level. He's like one of the knights who would be hanging around. And he's also put on a foreign accent, so he's got a Welsh accent or something like that that makes him sound like he's not from this part of Britain. But let me throw this one out, which is Lisa, you brought up. Maybe you had a different idea in mind, but this passage at line 75 in Act 2, Scene 2. On page 87, that why are you angry that such a slave as this should wear a sword who wears no honesty? Such smiling rogues as these, like rats, oft bite the holy cords of twain, which are too entranced unloose. Smooth every passion that in the natures of their lords rebel, being oil to fire, snow to the colder moods. Oswald is the antithesis of Kent.
Yeah.
They're both in subordinate roles, serving masters, and Kent says, you are the worst kind of human being because you're feeding the passions and whatever your master wants. You feed that,
Mhm.
and you make it easy for him. And this, if you've ever seen Man for All Seasons about Thomas More, Cromwell, who says, this is what we're to do. Our king wants to put away his wife. We need to make it convenient for him. That's our whole role in life. That is one of the most corrupting things of the whole society, is when serving people take that attitude towards their masters. And Kent is the antithesis of that. So
That's good.
Anyway, okay, so I better run. Should we is it okay to just go ahead and read Act 3 for next time?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
That's perfect.
It seems like a good pace for us. I'm really enjoying it.
Okay, thank you. If anyone wants to stay around for a few minutes and talk about Edmund, because we didn't talk about him at all.
Okay, so recorded. I need to listen.
Okay.
To that. Okay, God bless.
All right, goodbye. Thank you. Did anyone have any thoughts about, I mean, one of the things that struck me was just the brilliance of Edmund's machinations. Like, he had thought of everything, even trying to anticipate what his brother, that's the one that made me shake my head. And then something came up just in like the pop culture reference to it last night, where you anticipate what the person defending their honor is going to say so that you disarm them of that. So he tells Gloucester, Edmund's going to say, I'm a bastard and I can't be trusted, or like, it kind of puts the words into his mouth that he can expect to hear. And then feigning the duel and the actually injuring himself, just the lengths he'll go to deceive, just made him more evil in my mind than he had even seemed before.
And it seems like he thought about a lot of that up on the spot. Like Edgar kind of surprises him and he's like, I'm going to work this into my plan. Like, just on the spot, he comes up with this idea. And then when he's telling Gloucester about what happened, just the way he disguises the information without actually saying, yeah, it was Edgar, he did it, boss. Is much smarter about that. The way he says, oh yeah, first of all, he's reluctant to tell him where he is. Like, Gloucester has to ask him 3 times, where is this guy? He's, oh, look, I'm bleeding. Yeah, but where is he? Oh no, but he's
trying to show him
cleverly reluctant. Yeah.
That's why I didn't quite understand that exactly. Ian, I also noticed that thing where he's saying, my lord, I'm bleeding. And he says, well, where's Edgar? And he's like, but I'm bleeding. And I'm not sure what Shakespeare intended by that. I guess Gloucester was more focused on his anger against Edgar than his sympathy for Edmund. I couldn't make sense of that, but I did notice it like Ian did.
Yeah, almost like he couldn't wound himself for nothing. He needed to get the attention for it that he was seeking. Let's see, there was another line here that I thought was especially devious. Persuade me to the murder of your lordship. Oh yeah, and that was one of my questions. I wasn't sure he was actually suggesting that Edgar was plotting murder, but that is, yes, but okay.
Yeah.
But that I told him that the revenging gods against parricides did all the thunder bend, spoke with how manifold and strong a bond the child was bound to the father. Just the irony of the passionate, persuasive language of how he was telling his brother what loyalty is due to a father while he's betraying him in every way possible.
He's a total and utter pragmatist then, because he knows the good and what's evil to the letter, but he's willing to wield either or to whatever means, to whatever goals he wants, and can do it really well because he knows it so well.
He just wants to get the inheritance, right? He'll do anything. And he has contempt for other people's guilelessness or goodness because it's all about the goal. So he has no respect. He has no moral principles himself and no respect for others. It just views that as making them easier to manipulate.
My suspicion, not that there's any real reason to think he was abused by Edgar in the play, but
really?
No. It's just that if you could really rattle off like the injustice of the bastard being like, mistreated and distrusted and abused, and the older brother who's like the true.
But is there any? Does he even claim that Edgar did anything?
No, but what I'm getting at is if he can really rattle that off to the T, like that injustice I'm sure a lot of people faced during that time, is it really true that, again, there's no reason to think that this happened in the play. We have no reason to think it, but something has had to have happened to Edmund to make him this.
He says it is in his nature. According to him, it is his nature, and no matter what circumstances he was born into, this would be who he was. And I think I'm glad you highlighted that, because I think that's precisely what makes him seem so wicked to me, is the facility he has for rattling those things off, whatever is convenient in the moment. So he's convincing it sounding like the wounded, mistreated person. He's convincing it sounding like the noble person who's trying to persuade his brother to do right. He's so convincing at everything. And then he'll step away from it and say, look how convincing I am. I mean, he just is totally self-conscious about the fact, self-aware of the fact that he's using it all for manipulation and that they're just dupes and he's taking advantage of them.
Right. I mean, just on that note, I remember you brought up last time the connection of like the orbs and the planets, and it's that's making him evil. And then, but he also says like, it's like everyone points toward the nature of the planets and the cosmology for the good or badness, or like their faults, the mistakes, the grievances that happen to them. And he says like, and that's ridiculous, like, oh, that's silly.
That's he said, that's when he says, even no matter what star I had been born under, I would be what I am.
Right.
So he criticizes them for ascribing the things that happen to the movement, to the eclipses or whatever. And he says they're fools for thinking that I'd be what I am. No, even if I were born under the most innocent star.
Do you think we could go back to that actually? And could you read it and make that clear? It's in line 125 of scene 2, act 1.
Okay. 125.
This is the excellent foppery.
This is the excellent foppery of the world, that when we are sick in fortune, often the surfeits of our own behavior. So when we're sick in fortune because we brought it on ourselves, we make guilty of our disasters the sun, the moon, and stars, as if we were villains of necessity. So we blame fate when we ourselves are the ones actually responsible for our fate. Fools by heavenly compulsion, knaves, thieves, and treachers by spherical predominance. These are still all the things we claim. It's the heavenly spheres that have made us knaves and thieves. We're just fools because the heavens compelled us to. Drunkards, liars, and adulterers by an enforced obedience of planetary influence, and all that we are evil in by a divine thrusting on. An admirable evasion of whoremaster man to lay his goatish disposition on the charge of a star, the dim view of man in general. My father compounded with my mother under the dragon's tail, and my nativity was under Ursa Major, so that it follows I am rough and lecherous. He's saying, like, that's the line of thinking that they would pursue, that it's because I was born under these stars that I am what I am. I should have been that I am, had the maidliest star in the firmament twinkled on my bastardizing.
Okay. All right. Now it's understandable. And then when Edgar comes in, he says, in fact, he comes like the catastrophe of the old comedy. My cue is villainous melancholy, with his side like Tom O'Benlum. Oh, these eclipses do portend these divisions. Fa sol la mi. So he even utilizes the rationalization of the planetary influences to justify, rationalize the fact that, oh, here comes Edgar. It's like Mother Nature wants me to go ahead with my plan. I'm going to invoke the name of Mother Nature, of the planetary influences, and, justify or rationalize for myself.
That's what fools do, and then I'll use their foolishness to justify what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Do we see this theme come up in other characters as well? Like the idea of fate versus free will? Are we fated to our actions and our personalities, or do we choose them? Do we make our own hell? Because I feel like there may be a little bit of inconsistency in the way that Edmund is describing that every person owns their own fate versus like Lear's situation, which seems like it's somewhat out of his control, like that he's becoming senile and he's losing his mind. Doesn't feel like something he chose.
It doesn't, well, that doesn't feel like something he chose, but does it feel like it's ascribed to the eclipses or to some supernatural force outside of him? It doesn't seem like it's ascribed to that. So I don't know. I think that's a good theme to watch for. I had the same question in Act 1. One of the things I noted to myself is, what is the role of fate here? What is the role of destiny as opposed to individual decision? But so far it seems to me very much focused on individual decision, and that I don't see his senility as at odds with that, because that's just a fact of aging. It doesn't give over, doesn't give things over to fate or destiny or something outside of him.
Yeah, because there's still many actions that have to be taken that lead it to become like the crux of a problem with
Mhm.
his daughters.
Mhm.
It's interesting because I just recently read Macbeth, and in that play, like the theme of fate versus free will is predominant. And the role of the tragic flaw of Macbeth's over ambition becoming his downfall is really interesting to compare to this play, which I feel like is more complex. Like
Mhm.
there isn't a clear fatal flaw that anyone is choosing. It feels like, choosing to pursue. It's more like the way that the situation is unfolding is there are small wrongs done that grow into very big problems. And like we pointed out earlier in the discussion, there's this really very difficult situation between the daughters and the father to figure out how to handle, him wanting to stay with them and have his nights, and he's already given over his power. There's nothing he can do. So it just feels like we're headed toward disaster, but it's not necessarily as a result of a fatal flaw that's
Mhm.
becoming the problem.
I think it was definitely a fatal flaw that there was no succession planning in the court of Lear. He waited until he was 80 plus and then just said, "Who loves me?" rather than, I don't know what the average life expectancy was in those days for a king, but I would have thought that at some point during his life, he might think about, how's this kingdom going to continue after I'm gone, rather than just waiting till 80 and asking that question.
That seems true, although it doesn't seem like the play's focus. If anything, I mean, definitely one of the questions I have moving forward is it's my nature and personality to want there to be a villain and a hero. And it's very easy to make Goneril and Regan the villains because they are villainous in so many ways. But I don't exonerate Lear of all blame here. So one of the ongoing questions for me is how much responsibility, and he acted so recklessly in the beginning, and that brought this on. How much is he responsible for whatever happens? But Ian, to your point, doesn't it seem like his weakness was that I don't know, is it vanity? Whatever prompted him to ask for the daughter's declaration of love, his vanity and his, I don't know, abandonment of judgment.
Yeah, we don't know what to ascribe to his character versus his senility at this, because we just introduced at that point. And we don't know to what extent is he responsible for Regan and Goneril's character.
Right.
I mean, how much of a role does a king play in raising children? Probably not that much, He's probably got other things to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think more practically, like the Fool points out, the more simple or more direct answer to like the error he made is the fact that he gave away everything. And the Fool repeatedly tells him that, like, he says, like, the snail, why does the snail have a house to keep his head in? He doesn't give away his whole house and leave nothing for himself. If literally that one thing he had not done, this whole thing would not have unfolded.
So to give it away, but if he had given it all to Cordelia, he'd be fine. So to give it away and to give it on the premise that he did.
But he would be putting himself in at the mercy of Cordelia's goodwill. I mean, we don't know. I mean, that would be stepping outside the play to assume that Cordelia would remain good. But the wise thing.
I don't think that's stepping outside of the play. We have to judge her on what we've seen, and what we've seen is that she would act sensibly and with respect and compassion. So, but I understand the point. It'd still be. But is there any cause? I mean, doesn't he need to turn things over
after they die, right? Like if we did, I mean, historically, the kings would. Sorry,
if he's senile, doesn't he need?
The kings of England have been certifiably insane and all kinds of things, but they never gave up their power. I mean, there have been very, very rare exceptions when they gave up, abdicated.
Well,
but anyway, that doesn't matter. I mean, we enjoy the beauty of the play. It's not I know I'm nitpicking on and shouldn't do that. I mean, it should just I should just take the play as this is what he did.
Sure, but I think what we should watch for is what is the central. There is going to be some kind of central question, I assume, whether it's a fatal flaw or this issue of, in some of the plays, it's fate versus individual will. But anyway, I am curious to see how things become integrated and what ends up being the focus of the downfall. We know that things are going to fall apart, but to what are we supposed to ascribe that disaster? Are we supposed to ascribe it to Lear's recklessness, to Goneril and Regan's duplicity and self-absorption, to Lear's temper, Luke says? I don't know. Well, that's what I'm curious about, to see where the blame falls, or if it just falls on both of them, on all of them. But so far, everybody who's good is suffering mightily, and the bad characters are doing all right.
Can I ask a question before we head out?
Mm-hmm.
So Edmund, like when you read that speech of his, he calls man whoremaster man. My interpretation of that being that people are licentious and pleasure-seeking by nature, and they are going to go through different negative to malevolent lengths to get what they want. How do you think he would explain / cash out Cordelia's decision motivations? Would he say, well, do you think he would say, well, it just is her pleasure to be good, to be dutiful? Or would he say, kind of like what Ian was getting at in that first meeting, no, she's just playing some kind of very long game? And so what do you think? I don't know.
I don't
what was
think
the fact
so,
we just say the Cordelia?
But he calls his brother, I'd like to find the line, but he calls his brother noble and trusting, because he would never do anything bad. He would never take a wrong action. So he does believe such people are possible. And from his perspective, they are the fools that he can take advantage of. So I don't know what this generalization about man, whether it's just the averages or I don't, but he definitely believes there are people who are noble and good.
Okay, I see. So in his universe, the good exists.
Yeah, I think so, which makes him all the more awful. All right, thank you, everybody. We'll reconvene next week to talk about Act 3.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.